Hey, how's it going everybody? My name is Eric Percival, also known as Scuffed Gamer here on YouTube, and welcome back to the game guide for Ravenswatch. I originally wasn't going to make this video, but I figured it had been a long time since I made a video, and I recently fell in love with this new team-based RPG roguelike that fully released about a month ago, at least as of this recording. It might be a little longer since then. To give you a brief summary of the game, Ravenswatch follows a set of fairy tale characters through a series of floors, as most roguelikes do, in an effort to wrestle control of Reverie back from Baba Yaga and an overarching nightmare, manifested presumably through the enemies in the game. These enemies are cherished Grimm-style originals like, I don't know, the Pied Piper, the Big Bad Wolf, Aladdin, I don't know, who I happen to be playing in the video. And at the time of this recording, there are 6 other playable characters. Each character plays differently and has their own unique set of skills and abilities, as well as character upgrades called traits. Each character has 5 skills: Trait, Attack, Special, Power, and Ultimate. Trait is usually a character-defining ability. For example, Aladdin can make wishes using Trait. Attack is your generic hack-and-slash primary attack. Special is usually some type of area of effect. And Power is usually dynamic and changes considerably between characters. Defense usually offers the player some form of mobility, dodge, shield, or other defensive measure to avoid taking damage. For example, Aladdin flips over enemies and projectiles, becoming invulnerable for a short second or so. Building out of your run will consist of you selecting a trait at the beginning of the run, and in this example I chose to have an extra wish and a higher chance for stronger traits. And selecting traits as you level up to create a cohesive build is a fundamental part of the game. Each character has the same stats: Vitality, which helps determine your HP, Armor, which helps determine the damage you receive or reduces the amount of damage you receive logarithmically, Damage, which increases how much damage you inflict as a flat % gain, Crit hit chance, self-explanatory, and crit hit damage, which is 1.5 times the damage plus another 0.01 for each critical damage point that you receive. Some characters want more of certain stats for their builds, but some are a tad ubiquitous, which I'll touch on a little later in the video. The floors contain a starting area containing the Sandman, which is basically this game's version of the shop. You'll gain Dream Shards during your run, which is this game's currency, and you'll use your dollary doodahs to upgrade your traits, buy items, rerolls, referred to in-game as Stars of Fate. The store is somewhat randomized each floor and on each run. From the starting area, the rest of the floor is populated by a series of semi-randomized areas called nodes, or camps, and they will have various objectives for the players to complete. These will generally increase in difficulty the further the player gets away from the Sandman, but will have better rewards as a result of that difficulty. These nodes can be broken down into a few basic color-coded types that will be revealed as you explore the map. Chests with items, dream shard piles, a wishing well that sells magic items, vision towers, optional quest bosses, nightmare tumors that reduce floor boss's health, also known as the Master Nightmare, and codexes that also contain waves of enemies but give you raw stat upgrades, and a few dozen other health fountains that increase your vitality. Your goal as the player is to complete as many nodes on the floor as possible, so you can become stronger before facing the floor boss, which in base configurations is after 18 minutes real time, starting when you leave the Sandman. It's important to note that in single player the timer will pause as you make decisions such as leveling up and choosing magic items, but the timer does not stop in multiplayer, or anytime you are teleporting between points of interest. Essentially, the game is a constant race against the clock. 18 minutes to complete 10 to 15 nodes of varying enemy density and difficulty. At a little more than a minute per node, that means choosing your map traversal wisely is given, but with the right build you should be able to accomplish the majority of the nodes on every floor. The main hurdle to this game being your positioning and your ability to gain relevant stats. You build stats too slow or level up too slow, and you'll fall behind the increasing difficulty between floors and against the Master Nightmares. Position poorly and you waste time being revived with your limited number of extra lives, indicated by the number of Raven Feathers you have remaining. In multiplayer, your team shares Raven Feathers, which I'm afraid is even more difficult, since the enemies also scale with the number of players in the lobby. This means that the ideal strategy is to pick our early traits, stats, and camps that lend themselves to mob clearing, and build some level of innate sustain. There's that buzzword. For higher difficulties where taking more damage could be catastrophic for the run. For example, spending time forcing your way to the deep end of the maps won't do you any favors because the enemies will take too long to kill at lower levels and are liable to insta-kill you if you position poorly. It makes sense to do a handful of nodes that grant XP early, such as the green vision tower and perhaps a green chest or two, so you can gain levels, choose traits, gain items, and solidify your build before taking on harder challenges. Your level is perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, damage defining attribute when facing down enemies and bosses, perhaps more important than the actual damage stat since it defines the damage multiplier. In other words, you gain 10% increased ability damage compared to your previous level's numbers with every level you gain. Now this doesn't mean that the damage itself isn't an important stat, but it does mean that your level, in my opinion, is far more important. Being behind on leveling up is a huge detriment when facing off with Master Nightmares and general area traversal. Stats or priorities can change depending on your specific build, but I've personally found the following breakdown to be more or less unstoppable. Moderate crit chance, let's say up to about 30%, slightly higher crit damage than base, somewhere between 55 and 90% crit damage, around 100 vitality, between 30 to 60 armor if possible, and between 25 to 50 points of damage by the end of the run. In order, I would prioritize crit chance, crit damage, vitality, damage, and armor if given the right breakdown. There will be some runs where you'll be offered a very large burst of damage or vitality earlier than crit chance, and I still often opt for taking those opportunities when they present themselves, such as with Cauldron of Drinwich, Cursed Item, or the Excalibur Legendary, because they can solve a portion of your build for the rest of the run. But let's use an example floor to illustrate what I'm saying. Every floor will generally follow the same pattern, so using the first floor, which is often the most critical for higher difficulties, should suffice. In the gameplay you're seeing, I decided to take an additional wish for Aladdin, and my intended rollout is either to force attack-focused build or power-focused build, since Aladdin's special is not an ideal ability. This gives us the ability to cast a very wide net. Either we're looking for attack or power-based items and traits. Attack traits will help us kill adds faster, whereas power traits will help us kill elites and single targets faster, so both are good choices. For our first starting common items, I like to pick up the Leprechaun Coin first, because Leprechaun Coin provides us with extra rerolls, and it gives us money back for our rerolls, which is pretty important. And if you have a stack of 5 Leprechaun Coins, the set bonus will provide you with just an absurd amount of money that you can use to break the shop. It's also worthwhile to take Horn of Plenty, which offers critical chance, rerolls, vitality armor, anything that you'd need, or Ogre's Blood, which eventually gives a raw damage boost and crit hit chance when the set is completed as well. Rare and epic items will be self-explanatory when you're following your build, and my ideal legendary or cursed items would be Philosopher's Stone for health, Town of Tobacco for better item selection, Excalibur for damage, Hope Diamond for money, and really, it's just Hope Diamond. Hope Diamond is what you want. Just don't die if you take the Hope Diamond. It's best to try not to diversify your item list too much early on, because a big part of the Sandman shop is duplicating specific item rarities. Meaning, if you have a single common item and you ask the Sandman to duplicate, quote, one of your common items, it can only choose the one common item you have, which forces the game to let you get closer to any given set bonus. I like to leave the teleport points for the Wishing Well or Codexes alone, unless I'm confident in my damage to clear the camps quickly, or have enough money to buy the entire Wishing Well. On Nightmare, it's unlikely you'll have enough money to buy the entire well, so I don't bother with clearing it early on the first floor, especially on the first floor. Vision Towers are very good to find early on, because getting to travel level 2 and level 3 will make subsequent cap clears even faster. Spending prolonged time at level 1 is less than ideal, and facing the floor boss at level 4 is a grueling experience. I mean, usually it's a run ender. Especially because you will not get your character's ultimate ability until level 5. In the middle of level 3, I like to find the optional quest and try to clear it, because you are guaranteed a legendary item if you succeed. By the time you're finished with it, you should be level 4 and have a strong legendary item to your name. Ideally, this item would be either Philosopher's Stone or Excalibur, depending on your money or trait rarities, but some builds want Raven Effigy. Town of Tobacco is also a great choice, and I highly recommend it for players who value creative control over their runs. The optional boss door has a requisite key, and finding it can be a time sink. The key is usually located within a short area around the boss room in a circle, but it ignores terrain elevation shifts and ground separated by bridges. If I feel there's enough time to go searching without sacrificing access to key nodes, especially in the high difficulty area, I will make a point to look for the boss key somewhere around level 4 unless I happen to find it before then. From level 4, it's a matter of clearing as many nodes in high difficulty area as you can safely afford to do so, while building critical chance, damage, and some armor if you have the means to do so. I used to laugh at taking green armor common item, but picking 1 or 2 up can be the difference between life and death, especially if your item pool has been lackluster. While I still adhere to the executing enemies is the best sustained philosophy from other roguelikes, I recognize the need to provide yourself with armor, healing, or both, especially when planning ahead for eventual final boss. Ideally, you'll pick at least one epic item that gives you a cooldown reduction for your keystone build skill, or an additional charge, at least. On Aladdin, I like to find either defense or special cooldown, since special generates the character's main combat resource, which in his case is enchantment points. If you've done the map traversal properly, you should be at least level 5 before the first Master Nightmare, and a handful of good items, a few Raven Feathers, decent stats, a legendary or cursed item, and a goodish amount of dollaronis. In this run, as you can see, I did choose to take Leaping Strikes and Power, which will more or less inform my decision for the rest of the game. When the timer runs out, you will be instantly teleported to the first boss, which is the Tentacle Master Nightmare. Master Nightmares generally follow the same combat pattern. An opening phase where the boss's main body will have a series of attacks players will dodge, additional mini targets for the players to execute, and will be largely difficult to damage until all the smaller targets are destroyed, at least without access to vulnerability causing traits. After destroying all of the adds, the boss will go into a short damage phase where it will be stunned and take full damage from all sources. During this time, players should unload all their cooldowns, starting with vulnerability causing traits and marks, and follow up with their ultimates and key damaging effects. For Aladdin, and especially in this run, this was the flip defense into Magic Carpet, followed by special power and dash attack. If done correctly, this should deal close to half the boss's HP, or in broken builds, it may even kill the boss outright. If not, the players will have to repeat this pattern again and again until the boss is finished. I refer to one cycle of these phases as a rotation, and on higher difficulties doing multiple rotations will become very difficult, as the bosses will become enraged, act more rapidly, and deal more damage to the players. Master Nightmare has 3 main abilities to look out for: slams from the tentacles closest to the player, a wave bullet pattern, and a large undodgeable, unblockable slam that divides the field into quarters. Learn to dodge these attacks and you will win the fight. The second floor will follow many of the rules of the first, the only difference being that the players should be between level 7 to 8 by the time they leave floor 2, and may elect to skip the optional boss or quest if they feel their build would benefit more from doing more codexes, chests, or dream shard caches. The second floor boss is the Faceless Master Nightmare. It has a spin attack that follows players too close, a short range AoE blast that deals a lot of damage, and a rotating laser that follows in a clockwise or counterclockwise fashion. It is possible to defend or dodge the laser. Throughout several of its attacks, the Faceless will also drop rolling mines that explode after a short period. Dodging the laser is easier when you're closer to the boss, but make sure not to step into its character model, as you might take incidental damage this way. After duking it out with the Faceless for a short while, it will summon a field of eyes to the stage and then resume its original attack patterns. Players will have to destroy the eyes to initiate the damage phase of the fight. Third floor, Avalon, can be tricky. Players should be at least level 8 and should probably avoid the green codex until level 9. The large gargoyle enemies and nightmare armors are some of the tankiest enemies in the game, whereas the elite witches both teleport and contract player movement to deliver serious damage. Clearing these camps should be done with more caution. The rest of the floor again follows the same principles of the first 2. This floor's optional boss is among the toughest in the game, and this floor's optional quest is in 2 parts, so I suggest players clear most of the other camps before deciding to do these optional areas, and only do them if they believe there's a particular item, legendary or cursed, that they need. For example, getting Hope Diamond at this point is usually relatively useless, unless you're specifically playing with Aladdin. I suggest to some new players to actually destroy one or both Nightmare Tuners on this floor, since it will take health away from the floor boss, which can be challenging at higher difficulties. Speaking of which, the boss of the third floor is the Claws Master Nightmare. Now, you've all seen this boss before in other games as 2 hands, 1 hand melee and 1 ranged, with both of their own stagger bar. The melee hand will alternate a wide unblockable, undodgeable slam, and a variation of that slam which sends spike waves aimed at 4 equidistant locations. The ranged hand alternates between firing homing AoE mines that explode after a short period of time, and a series of bullet patterns either in groups of 3 or in a more normal wave pattern. They also have 2 special attacks that they do together. One involves the claws falling to the outer rim of the arena and rotating in a clockwise pattern, creating an unblockable, again undodgeable, energy force wave. The other attacks use the claws start in the center of the arena and rotate outwards, dealing damage as they spin in tandem. This move, however, is blockable and dodgeable, and can be easily avoided by counting the rotations and dashing towards the center of the arena when it's safest to do so. Max out both stagger bars to initiate the damage phase, but remember, both claws have their own health bars. Destroying one of the claws will send the other into a damage phase, but failing to kill the second claw in this phase will lead to the other one being resurrected with roughly 30% of its health, and the players will need to complete another rotation as a result. I usually expect to do it at least 2 rotations against this boss if the nightmare tumors weren't destroyed, and doing 3 has been very difficult in the past. It's at this point that the main game on adventure difficulty is cleared. At higher difficulties, there is more content to be seen. Spoiler warning ahead for those players who don't want to see what Twilight Through Nightmare has to offer. You've officially been warned. The Epilogue sees the players gaining about 100 more dream shards to spend with the Sandman one last time before fighting the head honcho of the nightmare, Baba Yaga the Witch. Her first phase is very simple. Kill the adds in the cabin and avoid their dash attacks. The cabin will occasionally fire a bullet pattern or laser pattern. After killing all the adds, the run ends on Twilight, but continues on Darkness and Nightmare. On Darkness and Nightmare, Baba Yaga then spawns a horde of skulls with different abilities based on their color. Green skulls spew slow poison waves, purple skulls have short-range rotating lasers, and red skulls dash towards the players to harm them. Meanwhile, Baba Yaga will either deploy an unavoidable cone attack with black ichor that the player can only avoid by running out of the effect, or she will do a slam attack that can be dodged or blocked, but can't be outrun or dashed. Players will need to manage this phase in such a way that they always have their defense ability available so they can iframe through the wave, or use some other ability that offers iframes, such as the Snow Queen trait. You'll notice that this boss doesn't take direct damage, so the only thing that you could do is destroy the skulls, after which she'll spawn another wave of skulls, then another, and then the phase of the fight will begin. The final phase of the Baba Yaga properly fighting the players involves her just sort of teleporting around in her cauldron. She usually opens with a fast targeted bullet pattern that can be simply avoided by moving left or right, but she pivots very rapidly into either teleportation attacks that chain into flurry of claw strikes, more teleports, each with wave patterns, rotating explosive mines, or a tentacle slam like the first boss. She has no stagger bar, so the fight is purely about putting in damage where you can and avoiding the rest of her attacks. I prefer to fight this boss at close range, but this fight is much faster paced than any of the others in the game, and most characters' ultimates will feel wasted. This is where having prolonged sustain is important. Items like Unicorn Horn, Holy Grail, or simply having access to some of the trait-based healing can be paramount. Unfortunately, Aladdin does not have their own built-in healing, or they don't have a lot of built-in healing effects, and so in this run I did end up going with 4 Unicorn Horns and Holy Grail, and I was trying my best to make sure that I could end the fight quickly. Beating this boss nets you the true ending and the final lore chapters for your character if completed on Nightmare. Congratulations! And that's it. Those are my thoughts on how to beat Ravenswatch, especially if you're playing as a solo character. Some final thoughts on the game before I sign off. Enemies will scale with the number of players in your lobby, so in multiplayer having everyone on the same page is perhaps the most important and the most challenging part of the game. Some players will have all the RNG luck, items, traits, and everything else will simply fall into their laps. Others will have to scrape by for the things that they need, which means more difficulty. Stick together and ping the map so everyone knows where to go. I said before that some stats are ubiquitous. Things like crit chance, crit damage, and vitality all feel necessary for every character in the game. Even characters like Geppetto, who creates puppets, has key traits like heart ties which benefit from vitality, and the puppets inherit Geppetto's crit chance, damage, and crit damage stats. The Pied Piper's rats benefit from his crit chance, crit damage, and raw damage as well, meaning that no matter what build you choose to invest in, those stats should be prioritized and prioritized in that order. Some characters, however, have plenty of built-in stats that can inform your decisions. Sun Wukong, for example, can give himself 100 or more vitality with one of his starting traits, which means focusing on vitality might not be as necessary. Scarlet and Carmilla, the Dampier, have plenty of built-in critical damage, so you may focus on critical damage or even raw damage more than crit chance if you're playing on those characters. Finally, some traits are, and I'm just going to come out and say it, bad. Really bad. Bad traits. Useless traits. Every character has a couple of traits or talents that don't help with clearing maps and exist in this weird purgatory of, well, it makes this bad ability slightly better, I guess. Aladdin's special is not a damage dealing ability, for example, and using it takes your attack off cooldown, so its only purpose is to generate enchantment points, which makes your other abilities stronger. A natural combat rotation for Aladdin, therefore, is to open with your special, follow up with power, flip through enemies, use some attacks, rinse and repeat, with some variation in between based on your traits. Picking things like Dancing Blades, which force the player into manually ending their special for no reasonable gain, is just sort of a nonsense selection. You know, similarly, Cyclonic Appearance makes Aladdin's power deal a short wave of damage where it begins, which doesn't help that much since charging the power and hitting a distant enemy is the point of his power, not to become surrounded and slightly hurt all of them at once. Can these abilities be worked around? Yeah, sure. Of course they can. Would I rather have an ability that actually helps me? Hell yeah. By contrast, some abilities are absolutely must-haves. Aladdin's acrobatic skill is incredible and synergizes so well with everything that he does. It generates stacks of enchantment points for using his defense, it causes vulnerable, and it avoids damage simultaneously. It also combos with dive so that you can use vulnerability, generate enchant, and deal massive damage to a lot of enemies. Taking mediocre traits shouldn't happen unless the player absolutely has no choice. A bad trait can absolutely ruin a run by completely nullifying one of the key bonuses of gaining a level: gaining access to a new powerful ability. This unfortunately does exist for ultimates as well, though it is less common. So try to take traits early that have some semblance of coherence with a particular build. And as you take more good traits, don't hesitate to reroll bad choices as they're offered to you, especially through the middle and late game after many traits have left the pool of available options. Once again, Leprechaun Coin is OP. Thank you so much for listening to this guide. It's been a long time since I've made a video, but I've been very hard at work on my CompT and Cisco certifications. Even so, I've still found time to play this awesome game, and I want to thank the developers at Passtech Games for making such a fun co-op experience. It's been a blast. Get out there, everybody, and vanquish some nightmares. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day. So long, everybody.